Hi everyone, I'll be talking about Google Street View, the way that this map is generated, and the potential threats to privacy that it poses globally, and what can actually be done to mitigate this problem. So the way that Google Street View is actually generated is that a fleet of vehicles is sent out by Google all over the world, and these vehicles drive through all the different roads and streets, and they take images all along the way. These images are, well, every time they're taken, their location is tracked down using GPS, and, well, after all the images are taken, a computer stitches them together into a 360-degree panorama, and when users actually scroll around this panorama, they get the illusion of actually standing on the street. So, I like to think that Google Street View's impact on mapmaking can be thought of as a kind of Gutenberg revolution. For the first time, we have a map that isn't just an abstract or symbolic representation of the world. Rather, it's kind of a virtual experience of being in the world. It's like the first time that users are actually put into the spaces to experience them as if they were actually there, rather than being presented with some kind of abstraction of geospatial information, which they could kind of interpret in their own way. I think that one of the most important impacts this has had is that, well, the bias of map makers that used to affect maps in, well, olden days is no longer a factor, because, well, people are seeing the world sort of as it is. And so it's a very objective view on the world. And as a result, I think what's enhanced is that since people are able to see spaces as they are, they're able to cultivate a more meaningful relationship with those places, well, just by looking at this extremely high-definition maps. And so more information is kind of available to them, and they can actually cultivate a more meaningful relationship with it. So, before I go on to talk about why Google Street View actually poses significant privacy problems, let's talk about why privacy is actually important. So, privacy has been recognized as a fundamental human right by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights of the UN, and most countries actually agree that it is a fundamental human right. And technologies like Google Street View, which are part of, like, well, a whole larger slew of advances in information technology, threaten privacy a lot. And so it's important to have this conversation. So, having established that privacy is important, let's start talking about why Google Street View actually poses a threat to privacy. So when Google sends out its fleet of vehicles to actually take pictures of the world, they don't really get permission for anyone on the street, whether, well, their photo can be taken or not. Google just believes that anything that can be seen by anyone on the street is public information, and so they just take pictures of everything that's on the streets. Now, the problem with this is that Google has been able to take some pictures of rather controversial things. Like, for example, Google Street View took images of dead bodies in Brazil. It took images of a naked woman in Vietnam. And, well, these episodes resulted in a lot of controversy. And it really got people talking about, well, what exactly is information that should be public? What is information that should be private? And, well, people start talking about the privacy threat that is posed by Google Street View. So, well, why does Google Street View pose such a big privacy threat? Well, in order to really understand this, it's really important to realize that Google Street View, it's available basically all over the world, and everyone can access it, everyone can see it, and once something's on Google Street View, it's basically global information. So, in order to illustrate why Google Street View can be a privacy problem, let's take two examples to illustrate possible compromises in people's privacy caused by Google Street View. So let's say that you're just walking on the street and one of Google Street View's specialized vehicles takes a picture of you and puts it on Street View. So now your face is on the internet, your location at that time is on the internet, and a human analyst can look at this information and they can relate it to the other maps on Google Maps, and they can find out exactly where you are. They can get other information now. They can infer other information, for example, where you live, and this information can be used by criminals such as predators and stalkers and stuff to potentially really harm you. And so this is like a very clear way in which we can see that a map like Google Street View poses serious privacy concerns. Another way that we can see that it's a privacy problem is that, let's say that there's a person who's involved in some kind of compromising activity. Like, for example, one of the most controversial images caught by Google Street View is of a man entering a adult video store in UK. So when Google Street View catches pictures like that, it threatens these people's reputation and their integrity, and potentially also their livelihoods, because it could result in problems with your job and that kind of thing. And if we take the discussion to a slightly more fundamental level, by not involving these people in the discussion of do they want to be put on Google Street View or not, it kind of strips them from the ability to decide for themselves whether they want to be broadcast to the world or not. In my opinion, it's really not a dignified way of treating people. Although Google says that, since anyone on the street could see it, it's public information. But it's one thing when just 3 people on the street see it, and it's a completely different thing when and whatever's happening on the street is seen by everyone in the world, and basically for all times to come. And so Google kind of compromises people's fundamental right to be left alone by not involving them in the decision-making process of whether they want to be broadcast all over the world. And, actually Google recognized this privacy problem, and it's tried to institute some changes to Google Street View in recent years in order to address these privacy concerns. So, for example, Google uses artificial intelligence to blur out faces and number plates on Google Street View, and if any of such information is left over by the AI, then Google takes requests to, remove them by blurring them out. Now, in my opinion, this response of Google's is not enough. First of all, the AI is not perfect, so it does leave behind a lot of information. And, this information can kind of be used by the wrong people to cause privacy problems in the way that we just discussed. And even when you tell Google about it and they remove it upon request, the problem is that, what goes on the internet stays on the internet. There's probably a repository somewhere that contains a previous version of Google that has that compromising information, and so it's never really gone through this approach. And so Google Street View poses a pretty significant privacy concern, and Google's response to it is pretty lackluster, and there hasn't been any serious thought about what to do about this. So let's start discussing what are some possible solutions to the privacy problem. So one thing that could potentially be done is a global privacy policy could be enacted in which all the countries in the world agreed on the limits that Google should be forced to observe when it comes to displaying people's information. Now, the problem with this is that countries don't agree on what privacy is and the degree to which it needs to be protected. Countries like Germany think that, Google Street View is completely unacceptable. You can't just show people on the street, basically for everyone. And so Google Street View, it wasn't available in Germany at the time I did this research. So other countries don't think like this. They kind of agree with Google in that, whatever's on the street is public information. And so in a lot of countries, you can just see that literally the entire country is accessible through Google Street View. And so countries do not agree on what privacy is, and as a result, it's very difficult to enact policy about it. So one way to deal with the privacy problem associated with Google Street View is by implementing a technical solution which actually changes up the way that Google's AI, which processes Street View, works. So in a paper that I read for this research project by Andrienko et al., it mentioned that if you take features that can pose a threat to privacy on a high-definition GIS, and you generalize and abstract them out, and you just kind of spread them randomly across the map, then it doesn't really impact geospatial analyses in a very significant way. And so I'm proposing that this sort of thing should be done with Google Street View. So features which can be identified as potentially threatening for people's privacy should be generalized and abstracted and sort of spread randomly through the map. There's a number of problems associated with this approach. Well, one of the first problems is in other geographic information systems, things like humans or animals or other such things they have a very indefinite nature, and they're expressed in data points such as points and images and that kind of thing. But in Google Street View, everything is kind of one homogeneous part of the picture, and the only way that you can identify people is by, like, for example, a small neighborhood of points which kind of have the same color. So how do you actually identify these people, and, well, how do you play around with that? The answer to that is that, well, image recognition technology is actually advanced enough now that it can actually recognize people in photographs, and it's actually also advanced enough that it can change what people's faces look like, and it can generate completely new randomized faces, and it can generate completely new randomized people. And so what I'm proposing is that the approach in this paper should actually be applied to Google Street View. So what should be done is that when you log into Google Street View, the people that you see should not really be real people. They should be AI-generated people. And the number of people that you see should kind of be equal to the number that there were when the AI when Google took the pictures. It's just that, well, maybe their exact location shouldn't be exactly where Google found them, and their faces shouldn't exactly be the same. And so in this way, a pretty important feature of the map, namely the people, can be preserved, and at the same time a lot of private information, such as, well, people's faces and that kind of thing, it can be totally, well, removed. And, well, this kind of thing can be done with every other potentially problematic feature, such as, well, number plates and a lot of other things. So there are a number of problems with this and basically any other such fix that could be used to deal with privacy. So the biggest problem is, how do you actually identify what feature poses a privacy threat? Now, there are some pretty obvious things that pose privacy threats. It could be people's faces, it could be endangered animals, it could be number plates, but the problem is there could be other features which are less obviously, posing a threat to people, and certain human analysts might be able to look at them and to get critical private information about other people. Like, even a flat tire in some circumstances can give you information about, well, who's there. And because it's difficult to consistently get information about what features in the map actually pose a privacy threat, it's very difficult to train machine learning models to actually learn when these features are present on the map, and to either blur them out or to kind of randomize them. And so there's a real problem.